The summer heat clung to the air as Jack steered the family's SUV down the long, winding country road. Trees lined either side of the narrow path, their dense canopies blocking most of the sunlight and casting eerie shadows across the cracked asphalt. Jack glanced at the GPS, which indicated another 2 hours until they reached the remote cabin. "Are we there yet?" Emily groaned from the back seat, her eyes glued to her phone. She barely looked up as the car hit a bump. "Almost," Jack replied, though his grip on the steering wheel tightened. "Just enjoy the view. It's peaceful out here." "It's boring," Emily shot back, her tone dripping with teenage disdain. Laura, sitting in the passenger seat, sighed and checked the map on her phone. "I still don't understand why we had to rent a cabin so far out in the middle of nowhere." "Because," Jack said, flashing her a grin, "it's the perfect getaway, no noise, no crowds, just us and nature." From the back seat, Ben, the youngest of the family, peered out the window with wide eyes. "Look at the trees, Mom. They're so big. I bet they've been here forever." Laura gave him a soft smile. "Yes, sweetie. They're old. Probably older than all of us put together." Ben's fascination soon turned to excitement as he pointed ahead. "Look, there's a funny sign." Jack slowed down as the car approached a battered wooden sign on the side of the road. In faded, peeling letters, it read, "Welcome back." "That's weird," Laura murmured. "What kind of welcome sign says that?" "Maybe it's for the locals," Jack offered, though his voice lacked conviction. Emily finally glanced up, frowning. "Feels like something out of a horror movie," she muttered, before returning to her screen. Jack chuckled nervously and kept driving, but Laura couldn't shake the unsettling feeling the sign gave her. The road stretched endlessly ahead, and Jack's confidence began to wane as the forest deepened around them. The GPS screen froze, the spinning wheel of recalculating, taunting him. He glanced at Laura, who was now watching the road more intently than before. "We've passed that car before," she said, her voice tight. Jack's eyes flicked to the side. Sure enough, the same rusted, abandoned car sat on the shoulder, vines creeping up its tires. "That's impossible," he muttered, shaking his head. "We've been driving straight." Emily leaned forward from the back seat. "Weird," she said, her earlier boredom replaced by a hint of unease. "I swear I saw that tree with the split trunk like 10 minutes ago." "It's just the woods," Jack said, trying to dismiss the creeping dread in his chest. "Everything looks the same out here." But as the minutes dragged on, the same landmarks began appearing. A fallen tree, the rusted car, and that peculiar "Welcome Back" sign. The pattern was unmistakable. Even Ben, who had been quietly doodling in his notebook, looked up and whispered, "We're going in circles." Jack forced a laugh. "It's fine. I'll turn around at the next bend." Yet when he did, the same sequence of landmarks greeted them. The realization hit everyone at once. They were stuck in an unexplainable loop. The atmosphere in the car grew heavier with each passing minute. Jack's knuckles turned white on the steering wheel, and Laura alternated between nervously glancing at her phone and out the window. "I can't get a signal," she said, her voice shaking. "Not even a single bar." "Mine's dead too," Emily added, holding up her phone. "This doesn't make sense. We're not that far from civilization." Ben started humming softly, trying to distract himself. "The trees are whispering," he said suddenly, staring out at the forest. "What?" Laura asked, her voice sharp. "They're saying we can't leave," Ben murmured. Jack snapped his head around. "Ben, that's enough. You're just scaring yourself." The radio, which had been silent for most of the trip, crackled to life. A distorted melody filled the car, like an old tune from a music box. The sound sent chills down Laura's spine. "Turn that off," she said quickly. Jack jabbed the power button, but the melody persisted, its eerie notes growing louder. Emily covered her ears. "Dad, make it stop." Finally, the radio cut out, leaving the car in tense silence. The family was now completely cut off, no signal, no other cars, and no way to explain the strange phenomena around them. The sense of isolation was suffocating. The road ahead twisted sharply, the headlights illuminating only a narrow stretch of pavement and dense woods beyond. Jack slowed down as a strange shape emerged in the distance. "Is that someone standing there?" Laura whispered, leaning forward. A shadowy figure stood motionless in the middle of the road. It was human-like but distorted, its edges blurry and shifting as though it didn't fully belong in this world. Jack hit the brakes hard, the tires screeching as the car skidded to a stop. The figure didn't move. "What the hell is that?" Emily whispered, her voice trembling. "Stay in the car," Jack ordered, though his own fear was palpable. The figure suddenly dissolved into the shadows, vanishing before their eyes. Jack hesitated, then slowly eased the car forward. But as they passed, the engine sputtered and died, leaving them stranded in complete darkness. The only sound was the faint rustling of leaves and Ben's quiet whimper. "What's happening?" Laura asked, panic rising in her voice. Jack tried the ignition repeatedly, but it wouldn't turn over. When they stepped out to inspect the car, they noticed something even more chilling. The vehicle was now facing the opposite direction, as if the road itself had turned them around. Ben clung to Laura. "I don't want to be here anymore," he cried. "We'll figure this out," Jack said, though his words felt hollow. Back inside the car, Emily rummaged through the glove compartment and pulled out a folded map. It was old and yellowed, with strange markings scrawled across its surface. "Look at this," she said, spreading it out on her lap. "It's marked with something called the Loop." Laura leaned over. "Who even put that there?" In the bottom corner of the map, a chilling note was scribbled. "No one escapes once they enter." Jack swallowed hard. "It's just a prank, right?" Laura shook her head. "Remember that story? The one about the cursed road people warned us about in town?" Emily's face went pale. "You mean the one where travelers keep driving forever?" Ben whimpered, burying his face in Laura's side. "We're never going to leave," he whispered. Jack clenched his fists. "That's enough. We're not trapped. We just need to think." He looked out at the dark forest. "We'll try walking. Maybe we can find help, or at least get off this road." Grabbing a flashlight, they ventured into the woods. But every time they tried to move away, they found themselves back on the same stretch of road. The whispers in the trees grew louder, and the feeling of being watched became unbearable. As they trudged back to the car, the shadowy figure appeared again, this time at the edge of the woods. Its skeletal frame was clearer now, cloaked in tattered, blackened fabric that seemed to shift with the wind. Jack stepped forward, trying to shield his family. "Who are you? What do you want?" The entity's hollow eyes glowed faintly as it spoke in a voice that sounded like wind through dead leaves. "This road is mine. All who enter are bound to it." "Why?" Laura demanded, her voice breaking. "Wyatt!" The entity tilted its head. "A price must be paid. Leave, and another must take your place." Jack gritted his teeth. "We're not staying here forever." He lit a flare from the car's emergency kit and hurled it into the trees. The flames licked at the branches, but revealed only more darkness as ghostly shadows danced around them. The entity remained still. "Your fight is meaningless. The road will keep you." Desperation took hold of Laura. She turned to Jack, tears streaming down her face. "We can't all stay here. If someone has to take its place." "No," Jack said firmly. "We'll find another way." But Laura shook her head. "There's no other way. The kids need to get out of this." Before Jack could stop her, Laura stepped toward the entity. "Take me," she said, her voice steady despite her fear. The entity stretched out a bony hand, and Laura's body stiffened. A chilling wind swept through the road as the entity absorbed her into the shadows. The darkness lifted suddenly, and Jack found himself back in the driver's seat. Emily and Ben were beside him, the car running smoothly. But Laura was gone. The SUV pulled up to the cabin just as dawn broke, but the family was silent. Jack parked and sat motionless, his hands still gripping the wheel. Emily clutched her brother, both too stunned to cry. On the dashboard, a note in Laura's handwriting rested. "Keep driving. Never look back." Years later, another family drove the same road, laughing and carefree. They slowed as they passed a lone woman standing by the roadside, her figure blurred by shadows. She raised her hand in a silent warning. It was Laura, her eyes glowing faintly as the road claimed its next victims. The hum of the car engine was the only sound breaking the stillness of the night. Alex leaned forward, their tired eyes flicking between the dimly lit dashboard and the dark stretch of highway ahead. The gas gauge needle hovered dangerously close to empty, a silent reminder of their poor planning. "Great," Alex muttered under their breath. The last sign for a gas station had been miles ago, and they'd seen nothing but endless trees and shadows ever since. The glow of their phone screen showed no signal, and the map app had stopped loading hours ago. The road seemed to stretch endlessly, an infinite ribbon of asphalt swallowed by darkness. Just as Alex's anxiety began to peak, a faint light appeared in the distance. It flickered softly, like a beacon in the night. As they drew closer, the light revealed itself, a neon gas station sign that read "Last Stop Gas" in bold red letters. Below, smaller words flashed intermittently. "Open 24 hours. Alex slowed the car, pulling into the station's lot. The place seemed unnervingly pristine for such a remote location. The pumps gleamed under the artificial light, and the asphalt was free of the usual wear and tear. Shaking off the unease, Alex parked by the nearest pump. They glanced around but saw no other cars or signs of life, just the hollow silence of the night. The neon sign buzzed faintly overhead, casting a cold glow over the station. "Looks like I'm the only customer," Alex murmured, stepping out of the car. The door of the station swung open, and an older man emerged, his hollow eyes catching the light. He offered a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Welcome," the man said, his voice low and monotone. "Looks like you've come just in time." Alex hesitated, the attendant's unsettling smile lingering in their mind. They nodded politely, keeping their distance. The gas pump handle felt cold and stiff, almost like it hadn't been used in years. As the fuel began to flow, Alex glanced around, their unease growing. The station was eerily quiet. No hum of insects, no distant traffic, just the faint buzz of the flickering neon sign. The surrounding darkness pressed in like a physical weight, making the station's lights feel like a fragile barrier against the void. "Long drive?" the attendant asked, leaning casually against the doorframe. His hollow eyes didn't blink. "Yeah," Alex replied, forcing a smile. "Just trying to get through the night." The man chuckled, though it sounded more like a low rasp. "You'll want to be careful. The road ahead can be tricky this time of night." Alex frowned. "What do you mean?" The attendant didn't answer. Instead, he simply nodded toward the station's entrance. "You can pay inside." The cryptic remark hung in the air as Alex finished pumping gas. Reluctantly, they made their way toward the building, the attendant's gaze following their every step. Inside, the gas station felt frozen in time. The shelves were neatly stocked with products that looked decades old. Glass bottles of soda, faded candy wrappers, and a dusty display of road maps. The clock on the wall ticked backward. Alex felt a chill run down their spine. Alex tried to shake off the creeping unease as they approached the counter. The attendant was nowhere to be seen. The register sat idle, surrounded by faded receipts and an old, battered ledger. "Hello," Alex called out, their voice echoing slightly in the quiet space. A sudden flicker of movement caught their eye. Outside, the gas station lights wavered, casting distorted shadows that danced along the edges of the lot. Alex leaned closer to the window, squinting into the dark. The shadows didn't seem to align with anything visible. The air inside the station grew heavier, each breath feeling like an effort. Alex pulled out their phone, hoping for a signal, but the screen remained blank. No bars, no Wi-Fi, just an empty grid. When Alex glanced back outside, the attendant had reappeared, standing unnervingly still by the pumps. His face was partially obscured by shadow, but his eyes seemed to glint unnaturally. Feeling the weight of the situation, Alex hurried back to the car, heart pounding. They slid into the driver's seat, turning the key in the ignition. Nothing. The car refused to start, the engine emitting only a weak click. The lights of the gas station flickered again, and a low hum began to build, resonating through the air like a distant growl. Alex's hands trembled on the wheel. Desperation clawed at Alex's mind. They stepped out of the car again, trying to keep their breathing steady. The attendant was gone. Only the oppressive silence and the hum of the flickering lights remained. Driven by a mix of fear and curiosity, Alex decided to search the station for answers. They pushed open a door marked "Employees Only." The door creaked loudly, and a musty smell wafted out from the dimly lit hallway beyond. At the end of the hallway, another door stood slightly ajar. Alex hesitated, then pushed it open. The room beyond was small, cluttered with old photographs pinned haphazardly to the walls. Each photo featured a traveler standing in front of the gas station, their faces frozen in expressions of terror. Alex's breath caught in their throat. The photos spanned decades, different cars, different clothes, but the same gas station unchanged. Even more disturbing, in the corner of many photos stood the same attendant, wearing the same blank expression. A faint whisper filled the room, growing louder with each passing second. Alex spun around, heart racing, but saw no one. The photographs seemed to close in on them, the eyes of the terrified travelers almost pleading. Then Alex spotted something even worse, an empty frame on the wall. Below it, scrawled in faded ink, were the words, "Next arrival." The whispers intensified, and the room grew colder. Alex stumbled backward out of the room, slamming the door shut. The whispers followed, echoing in the narrow hallway. As they turned to leave, the attendant stood at the other end, his face no longer human. His eyes glowed faintly, and his skin seemed to ripple, as if barely containing something monstrous beneath. His voice, now deep and resonant, filled the space. "You've seen the truth. There's no leaving now." The shadows outside the gas station began to move, taking on vague human shapes. They pressed against the windows, their faces pale and lifeless. "Who are they?" Alex demanded, their voice shaking. "They were like you," the entity said, stepping closer. "Lost souls, trapped by the road. This place feeds on fear, on despair. And now, it's your turn." The shadows outside grew more defined, their hollow eyes fixed on Alex. Each seemed to whisper, their words blending into an incomprehensible chant. "You have a choice," the entity continued. "Take my place as caretaker, or join them." Alex's mind raced, searching for a way out. Alex refused to accept the entity's terms. "No," they said, their voice steadier than they felt. "I'm not staying here." The entity tilted its head, amused. "You think you can escape?" Without answering, Alex bolted back to the main station, scanning the room for anything useful. Their eyes landed on a rack of emergency supplies, including a small canister of gasoline and a box of matches. The entity appeared in the doorway, its grotesque form filling the frame. Shadows swirled around it, stretching toward Alex like tendrils. With shaking hands, Alex doused the nearest shelves with gasoline, striking a match and tossing it onto the puddle. Flames roared to life, quickly spreading through the room. The entity let out a deafening roar as the fire engulfed the station. The shadows recoiled, their forms dissipating in the intense light. But the entity was not so easily defeated. "You can burn this place," it snarled, "but the curse will find you." Alex didn't wait to find out. They sprinted to the car, now inexplicably running, and slammed the door shut. Alex floored the gas pedal, the car tearing down the dark highway. In the rearview mirror, the gas station was consumed by flames, its neon sign flickering one last time before plunging into darkness. The road ahead reappeared, stretching endlessly into the night. Alex didn't stop, adrenaline fueling their every move. They glanced at the dashboard. The gas tank was full again, though they couldn't remember filling it. Relief flooded them, but it was short-lived. Catching their reflection in the rearview mirror, Alex noticed something strange. Their eyes now glowed faintly, just like the entity's. A chill ran down their spine. Somewhere far away, a faint light flickered in the darkness. A new gas station stood on the side of another desolate highway, its pristine pumps and flickering neon sign beckoning travelers. A car pulled into the lot, its driver stepping out cautiously. The last stop gas sign buzzed overhead, casting an eerie glow on the empty road. Inside the station, a familiar figure waited behind the counter. Alex stood there, their glowing eyes watching as the cycle prepared to begin again. The gas station would always be there, ready to claim its next victim. The hum of the engine and the rhythmic thud of tires on asphalt were the only sounds accompanying Mia on her lonely journey. The barren fields stretched endlessly on either side of the highway, illuminated faintly by her car's headlights. Above, thick clouds blotted out the stars, leaving the sky a dull, oppressive gray. Mia adjusted her grip on the steering wheel, her hazel eyes flicking to the dashboard. The digital clock read 1:47 a.m. She sighed, fatigue weighing heavily on her. She had been driving for hours, and the next town was still miles away. Hunger gnawed at her, and her stomach growled in protest. As if answering her silent wish, a distant glow appeared on the horizon. At first, it was just a speck of light, but as she drew closer, the outline of a building emerged. A flickering neon sign read, "Lonesome Diner, open 24 hours. Relief washed over her. It seemed out of place, but at this hour, Mia wasn't about to be picky. She slowed her car, pulling into the empty parking lot. The only other vehicle was an old, cherry-red classic car parked near the entrance. Its polished surface gleamed under the diner's harsh lights. Mia parked a few spaces away and turned off the engine. The sudden silence pressed down on her, amplifying the faint buzz of the neon sign. She hesitated for a moment, her hand hovering over the door handle. Something about the scene felt off. Shaking off the unease, Mia stepped out into the cool night air. Her boots crunched on the gravel as she made her way toward the diner's entrance. The door swung open with a soft chime, and the warm smell of coffee and fried food greeted her. The warm light of the diner was a stark contrast to the cold, empty highway outside. Mia paused just inside the door, taking in the scene. The decor was vintage, like something out of the 1950s. Red vinyl booths lined the walls, and a long counter with spinning stools stretched across one side. A jukebox in the corner stood silent, covered in a thin layer of dust. "Welcome." Mia startled slightly as a waitress appeared from behind the counter. She was in her late 40s, with a round face, perfectly styled blonde curls, and a uniform that looked like it hadn't changed in decades. Her name tag read Betty. "Sit anywhere, hon," Betty said, her smile wide and almost too cheerful. Mia nodded and slid into a booth near the window. There were a few other patrons scattered around, all sitting alone. An older man in a fedora stared into his coffee, while a woman in a floral dress toyed with a fork, not eating. They glanced at Mia briefly, their faces devoid of emotion, before returning to their quiet routines. "Long night?" Betty asked as she approached, holding a small notepad. "You could say that," Mia replied. "I'll just have coffee and whatever you recommend." "Good choice. You've got to try our famous pie," Betty said, her grin widening. Mia forced a polite smile. Something about the place felt stuck. As Mia waited, the unease she felt outside returned. She tapped her fingers on the table, her gaze drifting to the patrons. None of them seemed to be eating or drinking. The older man simply stirred his coffee in endless circles. The woman in the floral dress kept her eyes fixed on the empty plate before her, as if waiting for something that never came. Mia glanced at the window beside her. The reflection of the diner's interior seemed oddly warped, as though the glass was a funhouse mirror. She blinked and leaned closer, but the image shifted back to normal. The soft clatter of a plate brought her attention back to Betty, who placed a steaming cup of coffee and a slice of pie in front of her. "Enjoy, hon," Betty said with a wink before retreating to the counter. Mia picked up her fork, hesitating for a moment before taking a bite. The pie was surprisingly delicious, but the taste did little to settle her growing discomfort. She set her fork down and reached for her coffee. When she glanced back at the booths, the man in the fedora was gone. His coffee cup sat half full, steam still rising. Mia's pulse quickened. She hadn't heard him leave. The pie suddenly felt heavy in her stomach. Mia stood, leaving a few bills on the table, and made her way toward the door. She pushed on the handle, but it didn't budge. Frowning, she tried again, harder this time. Still nothing. The door seemed locked from the outside. "Hey, Betty," Mia called, turning toward the counter. "Your door's stuck." Betty didn't respond immediately. She was wiping down the counter with slow, deliberate movements, her back to Mia. When she finally turned, her smile was gone, replaced by a cold, unreadable expression. "I'm afraid you can't leave just yet," Betty said, her voice calm but unnervingly firm. Mia's throat tightened. "What do you mean?" "I've paid, and I'm ready to go." Betty sighed, as if Mia was a child who didn't understand simple rules. "It's not that simple, dear." The other patrons lifted their heads in unison, their eyes now hollow and lifeless. One by one, they stood and turned toward her. Their movements were slow, almost mechanical, as they began to approach. Mia backed up until she was pressed against the door. "What is this place?" she whispered. Betty tilted her head. "It's a home for those who've lost their way. You see, once you step inside, the diner keeps you. It feeds on your memories, your regrets." The windows behind Mia no longer showed the highway. Instead, they revealed a swirling void of darkness. The diner was no longer part of the real world. The room seemed to close in around Mia, the air thick with an oppressive weight. The ghostly patrons stopped a few feet away, their lifeless faces watching her intently. Betty stepped forward, her hands clasped in front of her. "You have a choice, Mia. Stay here with us, and you'll never have to face the pain of the outside world again. Or," she trailed off, her smile returning, but it was far more sinister now. "Or what?" Mia asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Or you can leave," Betty said, gesturing toward the locked door. "But freedom comes at a cost. You must sacrifice a memory, one that holds great meaning to you. A part of yourself will stay here forever." Mia's mind raced. She glanced at the ghostly patrons, who now seemed to radiate sorrow. "Don't listen to her," one of them whispered, their voice trembling. "We didn't know what we were giving up until it was too late." Betty's eyes narrowed. "It's your decision, dear, but make it quickly. The diner doesn't like to be kept waiting." Desperation fueled Mia's movements as she darted past Betty and the patrons, searching for another way out. She pushed open a door labeled Staff Only and found herself in a dimly lit hallway. At the end of the hall, she discovered a small room cluttered with old belongings, photographs, wallets, journals, all covered in dust. She rifled through the items, her hands trembling. Each object seemed to carry a heavy sadness, remnants of those who had been trapped here before her. On a nearby table, Mia spotted an old map. Scribbled notes covered its surface, detailing an escape route. One line caught her attention: "The emergency exit will open, but only after a sacrifice is made." Footsteps echoed behind her, and Mia turned to see the ghostly patrons crowding the hallway. Their forms were more grotesque now, their features distorted and inhuman. Betty stood among them, her cheerful facade completely gone. "You won't find peace out there," Betty said, her voice cold. "Only emptiness." Mia clenched her jaw and clutched the map. She had to take the risk. Following the map's instructions, Mia found the emergency exit at the back of the diner. The door was old and heavy, with strange symbols etched into its frame. Betty and the patrons stood behind her, watching silently. Mia placed her hand on the door, and a sharp pain shot through her head. Memories began flashing before her eyes, moments of laughter, love, and loss. One memory stood out: sitting on a park bench with her late mother, their last conversation before she passed. The door required a sacrifice, and Mia knew what she had to give. Tears streamed down her face as she whispered, "I'm sorry, Mom." The memory faded, leaving a hollow ache in its place. The door creaked open, revealing a blinding light. Betty's expression softened, almost sympathetic. "Goodbye, Mia." Mia stumbled out onto the highway, the early morning light bathing the empty road. She turned to look back, but the diner was gone. Only the vast, barren fields remained. As she drove away, Mia felt an emptiness she couldn't explain, as if a piece of her heart had been carved out. She pulled into a gas station and asked the clerk about the diner. He gave her a puzzled look. "There's no diner around here, ma'am. Hasn't been for years." Mia's hands trembled as she returned to her car. In her rearview mirror, a faint neon glow flickered on the horizon. The diner had moved on, waiting for its next victim.